everybody. Welcome to SharePoint Power Hour. My name is Joelle Farley. You've probably heard, if you've seen this session before, you've probably heard me on here talking about random stuff. I am also, my camera's not working, so I'm actually just showing my screen already. But I am also joined by two other members of my team. So we have Tavis. Tavis, do you want to give a quick introduction?
Sure, my name is Tavis Level, and I am part of the business solutions team and the resident BI developer for the team. So I deal with a lot of SQL Server stuff and reporting and dashboard type of technologies.
Awesome.
Hello,
All
everyone.
right. We have Steven.
Hi, I'm Steven. I am a member of the Business Solutions team. I specialize in the infrastructure and installation, configuration, troubleshooting of SharePoint.
Awesome. All right, guys, so we're going to go ahead and today, this session may be a little bit shorter than our normal hour-long session. This may only be like a half-hour session. So feel free, if you just have general questions, whether it's related to the topic of the day or if you have general questions about SharePoint, feel free to put those inside the Q&A tool in the Google Hangout or in the wherever you're watching it, whether you're watching it on Google Plus or on YouTube. And we'll be sure to answer those as we go along. All right, so I'm going to be talking about quick steps and custom actions today. These are these are basically one and the same. It's just the way that they're named depending on where you're looking at it. So basically, quick steps and custom actions are a feature that seems to get kind of looked over or missed quite frequently. These are ways that you can add additional, without any code or anything, you can add additional steps and actions to not only your ribbon menu but also your item drop down. So whenever you're clicking like the menu for your an item in a list and you have all the options in that menu, you can add things to that. And then you can also, like I said, you can add things to the ribbon as well. So that's pretty much what quick steps and custom actions are. Now I have literally a very, very short PowerPoint. It's 2 slides. So here's one, and here's another. But what I wanted to do is just point out some information, and I'll be kind of like referring back to this as we go along, but just kind of point out some things to know about quick steps. So custom actions are what you use to create quick steps. So custom actions are where you're going to go into SharePoint Designer and you're going to create these things, and that's going to give you your quick steps. And as I said, you can add them to your item menu or your ribbon menu. Actions include sending user to a specific form, so you can say, all right, if they click this, it's going to send them right to the edit form, it's going to send them right to the display form, it's going to send them to the, what's the other one? Display, the new form as well. So you can actually set up a custom action that does that. It's probably the one I use the least, so I will show it to you, but it's not the one that I use most frequently. The other two tend to be where I go the most. So then you have the second one, which is initiating a workflow. So if you have a manual workflow, and you want a user to be able to just click one button to kick off that workflow, then this is a way that you can do that. Because currently, if you have a manual workflow and a user needs to start it, they have to usually go through a couple of screens to get to the point where they're actually going to start the workflow. So this kind of allows you to be able to have that done quicker. And then you also have an option to send users to a specific URL. And you can use, well, I mentioned it a little bit further down there, but you can use query string filters and a couple of different things to really make something cool out of being able to send them to a specific URL. And I'll show that in just a moment. One thing that you do want to know, so before I switch over and start talking through some of these examples, one thing that you do want to know is that SharePoint Designer is required. So if you're not able to access SharePoint Designer or use SharePoint Designer, then unfortunately you will not be able to use this feature. So you will have to have SharePoint Designer to do this. It is, like I said, it doesn't require code or anything, so it is something you can do out of the box. It's just it does require SharePoint Designer, similar to workflows. There is if you're new to SharePoint Designer, you're not exactly comfortable with kind of clicking around in there. There is a button that you will see on your ribbon that's, as long as you have SharePoint Designer on your computer, you'll see this button on your ribbon and it says Use New Quick Step. And it will allow you to click on that. It takes you right to where you need to be in SharePoint Designer. It launches SharePoint Designer, takes you right where you need to be, and then you can begin creating your quick step or custom action. And then once again, that's on the list or library ribbon, depending on where you are. Okay, so let's go. I'll come back to these last few things on here in a minute. Let's go ahead and talk through creating some of these. So here's SharePoint Designer. So I already launched SharePoint Designer on my computer, and we'll be coming back to that in just a moment. But I also have a site here, and I need to get to a specific spot of the site, so bear with me one moment. All right, so I have a project database on my site. So basically, the first thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to create a drop-down for my item. So I'm not going to deal with the ribbon just yet. I'm going to actually create something in a drop-down here. So when my users come over and they hover over an item in a list, and they click the drop-down menu for it, or the ellipsis, they're going to see a list of things. Now, some of this is the stuff that we commonly see. So view item, edit item, compliance details, workflows, alert me, those things. Those are your out-of-the-box options that you normally have. But you will notice that I have two new options. So I have new task and project dashboard. I'm using the custom action of sending a user directly to a URL to set this up. So I went into SharePoint Designer and I set this up. This one sends them to the new task form. So this is just a project list, but there's also a task list on my site here. And I basically went to the new form. So I basically went to the task list and clicked new, and took that URL and brought it over to this list, so then that way if they ever wanted to create a task, they click here and click new task. I'm doing something fancy with this one where I'm actually sending information about the project to the new task form, and I'm doing that with a query string filter, and I'll show you guys that. We also have project dashboard. This is a page, and I'm also using a query string here. So whenever they click on project A, we know that the ID for project A is 1, because it's pulling that from the query string. And then it's sending that filter to everything else on this project dashboard page. So let me click on this. So basically what it's doing is it's because in my query string, in my URL up here, let me scroll over. The query string right here is the question mark. You guys can hopefully see that a little bit. It's the question mark project equals 1. So that's the actual value that it's sending whenever we use this. And it's sending that there's a filter on the page. If I edit this page, there's a query string filter, which is just in your filter web parts in SharePoint. And it's basically saying whatever that value is after that question mark up there, send that to projects, project tasks, and project docs, which are the 3 different web parts on the page here. So it's basically doing that. And so that's why I'm able to create a quick and easy dashboard, so I can see for a specific project, I can see all of the items that relate to it. So I'm going to go back over and let's take a look at how I did this in SharePoint Designer. Let me click back a few. All right, so like I said, if I went ahead and I clicked on, I'm just going to click on here to get the ribbon to pull up. So in the list menu, I can go to New Quick Step. And this is where, if you want, like I said, if you weren't super familiar with SharePoint Designer and you wanted to kind of have it launch exactly where you need it to be, this is going to allow you to do that. So you can click New Quick Step here, and it's going to launch SharePoint Designer. It will prompt you to log in, so you have to log into your site, and then it will go right to where you need it to be. But I'm just going to go the long way so that in case anybody needs to do that, you can see how to get there. So once I'm in SharePoint Designer, I need to find my list. So I know I was dealing with the project list. I'm going to go to Lists and Libraries, and I'm going to look for Projects, which is my list right here. Give it a second to load. And if I scroll down a little bit, we'll notice that right here on my Projects list, I have this Custom Actions area. So this is the area that if you click that button in the ribbon, this is what it's going to take you to, the Custom Actions here. I can create new from right here. If you create new from right here, it just defaults to the drop-down. So the new task and project dashboard, those were item drop-down. But if I want to, I can also create the ribbon stuff by going up. Once I kind of click new or click on custom actions here, you'll notice that the ribbon in SharePoint Designer changes, and now I have this custom action here. So list item menu is the default if I just click new down there. But I also have the option if I wanted to add something specifically to the display form ribbon, the edit form ribbon, the new form ribbon, or just the general ribbon, which is the view ribbon down here. So I have those different options there. So if I only have an action that I'm adding and it only needs to be for the display form and the edit form and the new form, I can do that. Or I can do it to the view ribbon. So we're going to start off with list item menu. Those are the two that I've created down here that I want to talk through. And then I'm going to show you guys how to work with the view ribbon. So I'm going to add an action that's going to launch a workflow automatically. All right, so the way I created these, so I have new task and project dashboard. We'll start with a simple one, which is new task. So I'm going to click on this to open it. And basically to create it, I just click new. So then I give it a name. So I name whatever I want it to show up. I give it a name, a description. And then if I scroll down here, here's those options I mentioned. So here I can navigate to a form. So if I want to navigate to the display form, the new form, or the edit form for my list, I can do that. You just basically click on it and then choose which form you want it to send to. And then you can also initiate a workflow, which I'm going to show you in a minute when I go over to do the ribbon button. And then what I'm doing is this navigate to URL. So what I actually did is, as I mentioned, this is for new task. So I went into my task list, I opened up the new form in my browser, and I just copied the URL. So when I copied the URL, I pasted it in here. You can also browse, so you can actually browse your site and try to find what you need. So I pasted it in here, and then with this specific one, I could either just have it be the new form.aspx, and then they click on it, and it just launches that new form page, and that would be really simple. I took this one a step further, and it's actually sending that query string, so which is project, which is going to be the project ID. So project equals, and then right here in brackets, we have the item ID. So basically what it's saying is whenever I click the new task, whatever item I'm on, whatever item ID, that value gets sent in the URL. And basically all that's doing is it's saying that we just called it project. You can call it whatever you want. I usually would just keep it like a one word to keep it easy. So I called it project equals, and then whatever the value is on that on that item in the project list. So project list, the first one, project A, the item ID was 1. So when I click that, it sends the value of 1. If it was project B, which is 2, item ID is 2, then it's going to send 2. And then when I can do that, once that's sent in the URL, I can do stuff on the page, like you saw with the query string filter. I can do stuff on the page to pull that value and then send it to different locations. So with this one was a little bit more advanced, because what it's actually doing is when I click new task, let me go back over here. So if I go to project A and I click new task, this one is actually sending the value from my URL, that query string. It's actually sending that to a field in the task form. This one, you can use query string, but you're going to have to probably work a little bit with jQuery to get this to function. And it's not a lot of jQuery, but it's a little jQuery. And I think maybe on a future session we'll go through how to do that. But basically what it's doing is it's sending that value. Now it's sending it to task name, because I was just kind of playing around with it. But you would probably want that to have like in your task form, you'd want to add like a project ID or something field and then have it sent there. And then that would send that value there for you. And you could even decide, with the jQuery, you can decide whether or not, if once it sends the value, whether or not it's read-only, or if they can change it. So that's the idea there. But like I mentioned, it could be as simple as you just want to send them. You don't have to do, maybe you don't need something like fancy. You just want to be able to send them to the new task form. Then all you do is copy the URL of the new task form, and then in SharePoint Designer here, you're just going to paste that URL in. And then you wouldn't have this extra piece here. You would paste that in, and then they would just, whenever they click on it, it just launches that new form. They fill out a new task and then save it. So that's what you could do there. You can add a button image. This really doesn't work as necessarily for the list item. So I will show you guys how, especially with 2013. But I will show you how to do that with the ribbon. And then we have this rights mask and then sequence number. Rights mask is going to be what you can, where you can control the permissions that can see this action. Empty mask just means pretty much anybody can see it, so anybody who has permission to the site can see it. So if you wanted to get more specific with that, maybe you said you only wanted the people who could approve things to see it, or you only wanted the people with certain permission level to see it, then you could put the different mask in there. And the way that those work, let me go back to my PowerPoint. I have a link right here, which I'll put into the description of the YouTube video. So rights mask is where you can get a list of all of those options there. So I'm going to click on that so we can take a look at some examples. So here, if I scroll down, I can see that what the empty mask, like I said, it basically just is going to allow you to it just basically allows you to add it, and then you don't have to worry about, whoever has permissions to this site will be able to see it. But you can also do view list items, so if they can view list items, they can see it. If they can add list items, they can see it. And here's one I've used before. If they can approve items, so maybe if it's a user, you only want the approvers of a specific thing to see this action, then you can put approve items, this is exactly how you see it here. You can copy this and put this into the rights mask field here. And then only users who can approve items, who have permission to approve, will be able to see this action. So that's what the rights mask is. And then sequence number, with the drop down, it's a little bit different from the ribbon, but with the drop down, you can actually number the way that they show up. So like, let's say if I had added these out of order, maybe I had added new task and then project dashboard, it just adds them the newest one on the top. But let's say if I wanted project dashboard to always be at the top, then I could come in here, I could make project dashboard 1, and then make new task 2, and then that way they would show in the order that I want them to. Similar to the promoted links web part if you've used that. So then once I'm done with this, I click OK, and then I can go back to my site. If I was just adding this as a brand new one, I could go back to my site and refresh. And then here under Project A, now I have that new task. So I click on that and it brings me to that URL. And the project dashboard is exactly the same. We'll kind of talk through that just to show you. So let me go. I keep losing where I'm at. Okay, project dashboard, called project dashboard. I'm also using this to navigate to a URL. The difference is like with this one, I can go ahead and I can I'm navigating to a page here, so you'll see the project pages / project dashboard.aspx. But then this is where I've added the query string for this one. So I'm saying project, because like I said, that's just basically a made-up word, whatever you want it to be, is equal to the item ID. So whenever I click on that drop-down menu and click project dashboard, it just knows whatever item ID for that item, and it sends that in the URL. And as you can see, all the other stuff down here is the same. So when I do that and click OK, and go back to my list. So now when I click Project A and I click Project Dashboard, it's going to send the 1. If I do B, it's going to send 2. If I do C, it's going to send 3. So I'm going to click Project Dashboard for C so you can see that. And then what I did is on my site, and you'll look up in the URL here, !project equals 3, so it's in that value. And then on my site here, or on my page, I added the query string filter. And I'll just quickly show you what that looks like. And all I did is I'm telling it that query string is just the filter name, and then I'm telling it what value to look for, which is project, the one I made up. So then I put project, and then I can put a default value. So that way if somebody hits this page and they haven't come through that project dashboard action, then it just would default to the first one. So I put that in there, and then I click OK. And then all I'm doing is just like any other filter, I'm sending, using the connections here in my web parts, I'm sending filter values to project tasks, projects, and project docs. Each of those things, each projects, project tasks, and project docs, like with projects, this is just the regular project list, so I'm just showing the information about it, so I'm just sending ID to ID. But then with tasks, I actually have a lookup that when my users add a new task, they actually have a lookup to the project ID that they choose. And I have that for docs as well. So that way I can send the query string filter, whatever that value is, to the ID for project tasks or project docs. So it's probably a little bit more complicated than some things, but once you get it figured out, it's a really neat feature to have because, like I said, you don't need any code or anything. You're basically just doing this right inside of SharePoint Designer with some URL work. All right. Can you send, okay, we have a couple of questions. Let me answer those real quick before I move on to the workflow one. So Carlos asked, can you add multiple rights masks? I don't believe that you can. If I remember correctly, I think it's just one at a time. But let's see. I'm trying to see if it said anything on here. But I don't think you can. I think you have to just, like, if you try to do like a colon and then another one, it's not going to take, it's just going to ignore the second one. I believe you have to only have one. And then we have another question from Paul. Can you send multiple fields to the task form in the query string? Yes, you can. You can send multiple fields to the task form in the query string. You just have to write the query string to be able to do that. And there's a couple of different, different ways you can write query strings, but if you look up query strings, it should give you a good bit of information on the URLs for those. But I know there is a way to do that. I can't remember if it's like another question mark or a comma or what. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know there is a way to do it. And if you guys, Tavis or Steven, if you happen to know, let me know. All right, so with that said, let's go back over to the SharePoint Designer. So now I want to do something new. So I showed you guys how to add the drop down in the item for a project. But now let's say I have a workflow that has to get kicked off manually. It's not an automatic workflow. I have a workflow here that when my users want to come in, they want to launch a workflow, they have to click on the item, they have to click workflows, or they have to go to the ribbon and click workflows. Then they have to click project workflow. And then that's how they kick it off. So it takes a couple of clicks there. But I want to make this simple for my users. I want to add right in the ribbon, in the workflow section, I want to add a new icon and call it project workflow. So just right here, they can come in, they click that, and it launches the workflow automatically. I can do that with custom actions and quick steps. And the way that I would do that is I go back to SharePoint Designer, and I'm going to I'm not adding a list item menu, I'm going to add a view ribbon here. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to click view ribbon, and I'm going to call this project workflow. And I can add a description if I need to. And then I'm going to scroll down here to where it says navigate to form and initiate workflow and navigate to URL, and I'm going to choose initiate workflow. And what it's going to do here is it's going to show me any workflow that's associated to this list or whatever content types are on this list. So if you can use reusable as well. But it has to be a workflow that is able to be started manually. If it's a workflow that's not able to be started manually, it's not going to show up in this drop-down. Because you have to remember that this action is allowing users to start it manually. So if you've said in the workflow that you can't do it that way, then it's not going to be an option here. So just something to remember. Now you remember me mentioning these button image URLs. If I want to, this is kind of cool, if I want to give it a specific image in the ribbon, like a specific button, I can load that here. And you can load images that are 16 by 16, which is the little smaller icon you'll see in the ribbon, or 32 by 32, which is that bigger icon. I would typically load both, so that way no matter where it shows up in the ribbon, you have an icon. And what I've done is I already have a 16 by 16 and 32 by 32 image loaded inside of my site, so I'm just going to browse to those really quick, and they're in my site assets. Go to site assets. And I'm going to add this one to both. So I've added that. So then we have an image for that. So now if I scroll down, you'll notice we still have rights mask, we still have sequence number, but we have this new area here, and it's ribbon location. So basically, this is where the button is going to show up. The default is going to, basically what it's going to do is it's going to create, in your ribbon, it's going to create a new area called actions. And it's going to call custom actions, and it's going to put this new button in that area. But let's say if I didn't want that, if I want it to show in one of the existing areas of my ribbon. So for example, because it's a workflow, I want it to show right here in workflows. I can actually change this so that it shows in the area that I want it to show in. Now, how you're probably going to say the workflow is pretty easy because I could just go in here and change it right here to say workflow. But you're probably asking, well, how am I going to know if I want it somewhere else, or if I forget what part I'm supposed to change? How do I know that? Well, thankfully, which is rare, but Microsoft has given us a way to kind of know the different ribbon locations and what their names are behind the scenes. So if I go back to my PowerPoint, and this is another thing I'll put into the description. If I go back to my PowerPoint here, I have ribbon locations. Click on this URL. And now I can see all of the different ribbon locations. So where application management, permission management, these are all the different ones. If I scroll down, I can see workflows, which are somewhere down here. I forgot to look at this earlier to see how far down they were on the page. Ribbon, documents, where's workflow? There we go. So I have workflow here. So I can see exactly, it's just basically I'm going to replace that action with a workflow. But all of those are listed there so you can kind of figure out where in the ribbon that you want to place this. So I'm just going to change actions here to workflow. And that's going to put it in the workflow section with everything else. And then the sequence number, I'm just going to make it 100. And then that way, I'm done now. So I've added the name, I'm initiating the project workflow, the image that it's going to show, where it's going to show in the ribbon, and the sequence number, which is 100, which is just going to put it on the end of the workflow area. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click OK. And then you also have rights mask, so you can use that as well. I'm going to click OK. So now it's added to my my custom actions. So I'm going to go back to my site and refresh. Click on Project B, go to Items, and here's my Project Workflow button. So now you'll see I have an image here. It says Project Workflow. It's in the Workflow section. So now I click this, and it's going to launch my workflow. So now that workflow is going to run. So you see one click, and then I was able to launch it. Now you could put that in the down here in the item drop down as well. You could do that. I just wanted to put it in the ribbon so you guys could see what the image would look like. And depending on where you put it in the ribbon, you can see here, this is the 16 by 16 image, whereas like where I put it, it's the 32 by 32. So that's the difference between those. That's why I load both, so that way where it ends up in the ribbon, it still has an image associated to it. All right, and then we're about at a half an hour, which is what I thought it would be. Let me make sure I didn't forget anything in my PowerPoint. So let's see, images can be added to give the action a logo, specifically when added to the ribbon. We talked about that. Use a custom action and a query string filter to create a dashboard page. The quick step location can be configured by editing the ribbon location and sequence number. So we have that URL for the ribbon locations, which I'll put into the description. You can also just Google that, and you'll be able to find it. The rights mask option allows you to control what users can see in the quick step, what quick steps they can see, and then the rights mask URL. So we have that as well. All right. Any questions on any of that? I'll give it a couple seconds so people have a chance to type it into the Q&A. And I don't know if any of you guys are watching, Tavis or Steven, if you guys have an eye on YouTube. If there's any questions coming in there, let me know.
I've been watching it. There's not so far.
Okay. I think most people are using the Q&A feature now, which is great. And it doesn't have to be a specific, since we have some time, it doesn't have to be specific to this. If you guys have any general questions, feel free to put those in there. Unless they're about Laura's awesome HR process that she's been going through, because I probably won't be able to answer those. But I can bring those to her.
This was some cool stuff, Joelle.
Thank you. Yeah, it's one of the, like I said, it's one of those things that people tend to overlook or not notice. And you can kind of get some cool, especially being able to use the query string with it. That's where I really see the power.
I don't use SharePoint Designer a whole lot in the stuff that I do. What permissions do you need to be able to log into the site with SharePoint Designer and do all these changes?
You need at least design permission.
Okay.
Yeah, from what I remember.
And it can be locked down on the server side, so you can prevent anybody from using it.
Right.
So that was part of what I think Joelle was saying at the beginning, is if you don't have access to it at all.
Yeah, then it's something you may want to show. You know, and I actually had people in a training class recently, and there was a lot of them that were dealing with that, where they know a lot about workflows, and they really want to build these custom workflows with SharePoint Designer, and I was like, well, you know, you just have to make a business case for it and let them know, you know, show them what you can do with it. Maybe get I was telling them to we have a trial environment, Rackspace. If you go to sharepoint.rackspace.com, you can get a trial environment, and you can actually, if you get an enterprise trial, and you can actually, you know, use SharePoint Designer if you want to do it on your home computer or whatever, and then you can kind of, do some testing, put some solutions together, and then, you know, try showing it to them and letting them know what you can do with it. And you might have some luck, you may not, but it's worth trying.
And
it's what I had to do years ago.
And a video like this, you know, if you can just bring them in and show them, we could do this.
Exactly. It's what I had to do a while ago, long time ago, when I was being told I couldn't use SharePoint Designer, but that was way back in 2007, so there wasn't really much you could do with SharePoint Designer back then. I mean, there was, but it was clunky. All right, I'll give one more minute, and then we'll go ahead and we'll just call it a day, and we'll be back next week with another session. I don't know if do you guys know what the next session is?
Bring them in and show them,
I do not know.
Okay. Well, we'll get that information out there for you guys as soon as we know what the next session is. All right. I don't see any other questions, so if you have any, just feel free to put them on the YouTube channel, and I'll check on that later on. And like I said, I will put these URLs in the description as soon as we finish up today. Oh, it looks like we have some questions that just popped up. So Susan says, great info. I can see using this in the near future. Thanks, Susan. Let us know how it goes and what you come up with for it. And then we see, is the project site you showed created from a template from Michael? No, it's not. It's a team site, and what I did with that, Michael, is I just basically, let me go over there. I basically created a custom list and called it projects, and then just put some information in here. And then behind the scenes here, I also I have a calendar, and so like I said, it's basically a team site. So I have a calendar, a task list, and then also a document library for projects. And then I created a page with that project dashboard. So it's not a template, but it is something that you can easily create from a team site. All right, so I have a BI question. Oh, Tavis, we have a BI question. So Carlos is asking, I have a BI question. Can a pivot table based on the data table be changed to use a Power Pivot data model so it can be refreshed through SharePoint Online feature?
Let me read that one real quick. Hold on.
Sure,
Let me get into the... I'm not in the Q&A here, so give me just...
There are a lot of pivot table refresh things going on in that sentence.
So Carlos is asking, I have a BI question. Can a pivot table based on the data table be changed to...
Okay. So yeah, if you have an Excel workbook and there is a data table in there and you have a pivot table in the Excel workbook that you're using to report off of, I don't know if you can change that connection directly, but you could definitely have a Power Pivot model and recreate that pivot chart or pivot table to point to a Power Pivot workbook. That is definitely possible. And then Power Pivot can refresh, but out of the box, I think it only refreshes once a day is how often you can schedule it to refresh. So it will usually have like a day's lag in terms of the data that you're seeing. Hopefully that answers your question, if I understood it correctly.
Yeah, Carlos, let us know if you have any follow-up to that. So go ahead and mark that as done. All right, and then we have Andrew asks, and this might be something that you can, Stephen, you might want to chime in on too. So the off-topic question, pros, cons, and dangers of uploading videos directly into SharePoint. 0.5 to 1.5 gigs for each one. maybe dozens of these videos, as opposed to a shared drive and using the media viewer web part to watch the video from there. Obviously, I think it's gonna come down to exactly how much space that you have on your server and how much you're willing, if you wanted to get additional storage, how much you're willing to put into that, because SharePoint storage is a little bit more expensive. So it depends on that. But I think the pro, if you do store it in SharePoint, the pro is going to be that you can add metadata around the video. And then you can do searching and stuff like that, especially if you're using SharePoint 2013, which, yeah, you mentioned that. So that's the pro there. The danger is going to be, and Stephen might have some information on that, but the danger is going to be depending on how much you have. If you're going to continue to add videos and you're going to really get kind of get kind of crazy with the storage. Let's say you're going to get into like terabytes of videos or something like that. And the danger you have there is just dealing with like your site collections kind of being too large, your content databases being too large, performance problems. And there are ways to store. I think there are ways to keep your videos in a cheaper storage, like a shared drive, and then just plug search into it, so you can just search through the videos and pull them up. But I'm not, yeah.
There are a few different ways to deal with that. So I agree with everything you said on the pro side.
Mm-hmm.
On the con side, there are a couple of things. One is that you'll have to monkey a little bit with the upload limits in SharePoint.
Okay.
And once you get up past 2 gigs, it's pretty much a non-starter, because SharePoint just can't upload something larger than that in any sort of consistent way. And even something as large as a gig or a gig and a half, you may have trouble if you're working with people who are outside of your network. So like they're trying to upload it over the internet. A lot of times you'll end up with problems where it keeps timing out in the middle of the upload, stuff like that. So if you're going to be dealing with data that size, it's best to do it within your network so that you can upload it directly into SharePoint. If you do start to get into a situation that Joelle was talking about where you have a lot of data, you're doing terabytes of these videos, that's when you would start looking at either putting it outside of SharePoint or using remote blob storage. The problem with remote blob storage is that most people immediately gravitate to what is called the SQL file stream provider, which is Microsoft's sort of demonstration implementation of RBS, and it works with SQL, and it's free, which is why everybody gravitates towards it. The problem is it was never really intended for production use for a situation like that. It doesn't have some of the more advanced management tools for cleaning up any sort of data loss situations where your system went down for a little bit and you end up with data that's in the remote blob storage that's not accounted for in the database, things like that. It's not easy to clean it up, and it's not as robust. So there are third-party tools by AvePoint, Metalogic, some other that can help you managing the remote blob storage. But there are limitations to all of them. The SQL file stream provider, for example, can only do files on the SQL servers. So you can put it on another SQL server if you want to get complicated and you want to have a SQL Enterprise license to do it, but it has to be on a SQL server, which in a lot of cases is what you're trying to avoid because it's a more expensive form of storage, like Joelle was saying. So each one of the RBS providers has kind of their ups and downs. The SQL file stream provider in particular, though, we don't really recommend that anybody try and use that in production, generally speaking. So I think that for a small number of large videos, maybe going to a file share or a separate web application and using the media viewer is a better way to go, especially if it's a static list of videos. Like, it's not something that people are going to be uploading and downloading and changing a lot. It's just, here are 5 training videos. Then it may just be worth sticking it out somewhere else and just using the media viewer to present it through SharePoint.
Yeah, great information. And let us know, Andrew, if that answers your question. All right. And Carlos, I think, has a follow-up.
Let me share my screen real quick. So, sure. I think the short answer is that probably not. You probably cannot change the where a power pivot chart or where a pivot chart or table points to. I mean, you can change it, but everything would have to line up perfectly. So like all the elements in your chart and your power pivot workbook would all have to be named like exactly the same. But you can get in and edit the connection information for any given connection inside of your Excel workbook. So if I open up share my screen here, let me see if I can figure that out. So for instance, are you guys seeing my screen now?
Yep.
Okay. This is an Excel workbook that is actually tied to SQL Server right now. It's not tied to a data table or anything. But I think what you could do, I mean, even if it was just data inside of your workbook, you should be able to click on the Data tab at the top and then go to Connections. If it's just the data table, there might be a connection in here. I'm not 100% sure. Like I said, this one is tied to a SQL Server table. But you can go in here and click on Properties and Definition, and here's all the info for what it's connecting to. If I had a Power Pivot workbook that I wanted to try and change this over to, like I said, obviously all the data elements would have to be named exactly the same, and the odds of that being so seem pretty low in most cases. But you could come in here and mess around with this connection string and point it to a Power Pivot workbook. I've never tried it personally. Usually pivot tables and pivot charts are pretty easy to rebuild. They don't take a whole lot of time, so it might just be easier to rebuild it rather than go through the trouble of trying to figure out all the new connection information and stuff. But that would be my best guess, is that it may be possible, but probably not very practical most of the time.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Tavis. And Andrew said that was very helpful. Thanks for the question about the video storage. All right. We'll give another minute just in case we have any other follow-up questions or anything. But those are some great questions and great answers. Thanks, everyone, for that. So how is the weather in the Ohio area? I'll do the obligatory weather question while we wait.
It's awesome. It's been nice and cool.
Yeah, it's really nice right now.
Is it? Yeah, it's actually nice here in Atlanta. It's been terrible here in Atlanta, but today we have some people flying in from Rackspace into Atlanta today, and I'm like, oh, they're going to think we have great weather here. This is just a lie. Don't believe it.
Well, that's when I first started with Rackspace, they had us come down in January in San Antonio. So we were in downtown San Antonio, and it was like 70 degrees and beautiful, and everyone was like, wow, it's nice down here. And I'm like, it's a trick.
Yeah, it's all a lie.
This is not how San Antonio is all the time.
Yeah. Yep. And Carlos said thanks, Tavis, so I think we're good. He's good there. So thanks for that. All right, well, I'm not seeing any other questions, so we'll go ahead and we'll call it a day. Thank you guys so much again for watching Power Hour. I hope you were able to get something out of today's session, as always. And we will see you next week. Have a wonderful week. Same to you guys. Bye.
Bye, everybody.